What's going on, everybody? Thanks so much for hanging out with us for another episode of the Just a Sec Conversation. For those of you back for more, much love. For those of you here for the first time, welcome. I'm really excited for the release of this episode, episode 49, with Mark Vittorio. And one of the reasons why is, we've chatted with a lot of people of various degrees of fame. Chris Harrison and Mark Cuban, who are known nationally and maybe even internationally. Of course, we got people that have local fame and have accomplished this or accomplished that. Well, I also love having the conversations with people that, maybe aren't at that level of fame, but their level of accomplishment is still so unique. And Mark Vittorio is one of those people. Is someone who is such an instrumental part of your viewing experience for sporting events on Fox Sports Southwest, whether it's Rangers baseball, Stars hockey. He's been involved with other products as well, both in this market and out of this market. Mark Vittorio is one of the foremost broadcasting minds in the country. And I'm not just saying that because I'm interviewing him and I'm trying to sell this interview. I'm saying it because that's what his peers have said about him. In preparing for my conversation with Vito, who I've known now for a few years, I asked some people around the industry, and that was pretty much a consensus sentiment shared. So this conversation hopefully takes you into the truck, the TV truck, and into the mind of someone who helps shape these broadcasts that we consume on a regular basis, and much more. But before we get started, just a reminder, I would really, really appreciate if you would consider subscribing to the channel, liking the video, commenting on the video, or just sharing the link to this interview or whatever other content you find on my YouTube channel. You can catch all of the Just a Sec conversations in addition to other sports-specific interviews and commentaries. Check out the channel. Hopefully there's stuff for you and your friends, but would really, really appreciate if you would consider subscribing, liking, commenting, or just sharing the link. It all makes a difference, and I really appreciate your continued support. All right, now, without further ado, episode 49 of the Just a Sec Conversation with Mark Vittorio. All right, Vito, this is a very generic question, but I like to start with this. You can go in whatever direction you'd like, but when you think back to your childhood, what were you like growing up? What were your interests, hobbies, maybe who were influences? You don't have to answer all of those, but when you think back to that time, what are the things that really stand out?
What stands out is I was a terrible student because I was a class clown. My parents had more parent-teacher conferences and meetings with the principal, Sister Barbara, and all my teachers, and I had to carry around a behavioral sheet to get my behavior approved by every teacher for every class. So I remember that. I remember that I ironically loved baseball and hockey. That's all I did. That's all I watched. That's all I followed. So to do it for a living is really a joy. My favorite athletes at the time were Wayne Gretzky, Denny Savard. On the baseball side, Ricky Henderson. And I remember getting a chance to go to Comiskey Park in Chicago to see Ricky Henderson, and he had a day off, so he didn't play. What else could I remember from my childhood? It was a lot of fun. I grew up in an awesome neighborhood that had literally probably 100 guys within 5 years of each other that all grew up together and lived together in the same neighborhood for many, many years. And a lot of our parents still live in that neighborhood. And that's about what I remember from my childhood.
So you mentioned, I forget her name, Sister something. So did you go to a school, like a religious school, or I guess it wasn't just your average public school growing up?
I went to a Catholic school. It was a parochial school, St. William. I started there in 5th grade, and that was a great experience.
When you say that, what was so great about it, other than the fact that you were the class clown and having some fun? How did that actually influence you as you kind of grew up, or was it just?
It did.
Okay.
Yeah, I think. Well, you know what? I had a teacher, Mr. Stiblow, may he rest in peace. He didn't like me very much, and when I was going into high school was really the most important thing for me growing up. I went to a school called Fenwick High School. It was ranked really high in the nation at the time. And my teacher said that I would never make it through there. And that kind of motivated me. And that's when I started to kind of have a bit of a drive. And that school really is what molded me. I learned so much there. Learned a lot about discipline. We had a dean of discipline. It was all boys. I had to wear a tie. I couldn't have my hair below the collar. And Mr. Heldman was the dean of discipline. And early on, the first couple of years, I spent many a day in his office. But as I grew up, I got tired of dealing with him. So I kind of grew up from there.
Well, that's interesting because, when I think back to my middle school, high school experience, not that it was identical, but it was a similar track. I didn't do bad things. I wasn't like hitting kids or doing things that were maybe cause for great concern, but I was definitely, I don't know that I was the class clown, but I definitely tried to be and had a lot of behavioral issues. And there were a few teachers who I could tell were just sick and tired of me, and inside that really that got at me. And then I also had a few teachers who I think about who, didn't leave my corner and whether they believed in me or they just, were going to be incredibly patient. And I think about those teachers and how much I appreciate to this day what they did. Cause not that I think I was about to go down the wrong path, but maybe I didn't stay at the school I went to, and maybe I didn't have the experience that I had, which ended up being a tremendous experience. So I guess it's, a lot of people look to college and maybe a college professor that was really influential, but it's interesting you bring up teachers around that age, because I think for me it was very similar, and those were enjoyable years and important years for me when I look back on where I am now and where I was then. For
sure. I feel the same way. Yeah, I have a few teachers that kind of took me under their wing and really pushed hard for me because they saw something. And that was important. I think it was important to be at the school I was at in fifth grade on, because they had a vested interest in making sure they, tried everything before they kicked me out, because my parents were paying a lot of money. They didn't have the money to pay for the school. They couldn't afford it. So everybody had a vested interest in trying to get me through. And the thing about high school that I remember, I'm a very competitive person, and I always have been. And so when I was in a school where some of these kids, the kids at my school ended up going to Harvard and Yale. And so you had to try to keep up with those kids. They were smarter than I was. They were much better students, and they were going places you could see. And so you didn't want to be left behind. And I think that really helped drive me.
Now, one of the first things that I think I spoke with you about when we first met was Italian food and your Italian heritage. And I'm curious, in what ways has that influenced you, whether it's just, some of the cultural aspects that were implemented growing up, personality stuff, or is other than your love of Italian food, in what ways has your Italian heritage maybe played a role in who you are and how you go about things?
I think because everything starts with family. Every Sunday it was dinner with the grandparents, and then family extends way beyond that. You start to live in a place where everybody seems to be Italian, and your friends become your family. And I've got at least a dozen friends that I've known for 45 years now, and I'm proud to say that. I talk to them all the time. I think that, we have some things that are really important to us. We get taught things about loyalty, about omerta, as they say, just to kind of keep your word and to keep secrets if you need to. Just a lot of things that I think really help me today. I'm a very loyal person. I care about people a lot. I saw my father, help everybody. I saw so many people just help everybody. And I think that's what our neighborhood represented. I don't know if it's so much about Italian heritage as much as it's just about the people that we were around who happened to be Italian, but everybody helped one another. And I think that's important. And so it helps me today. I always have holidays for people in our business. I always have a Christmas, because you never know. And you're well aware, there's so many people that work in our business that are that came from a different state, and they may not have plans on Christmas. So it's important to open the house up and know that they have a place to go. I think it's a lot of stuff like that.
I want to get back to that when we actually get into your career and what you do. I'm going to bookmark that because I imagine there are ways, just from a professional standpoint, that that plays a role. But you mentioned your love of sports growing up. What drew you to sports? Was that just a familial thing? Were you kind of an outlier in your household with a love of sports? How did you get pushed down the sports path?
Well, I think as a kid, you start back then. It was all about Little League, right? Everybody played Little League, so that's where I developed my love of baseball. I have my father to thank for my love of hockey. He always pushed me into hockey. He put me on skates, and I'll say this again because I think it's a theme that rings true for me. It was another thing he couldn't afford. When you grow up in the city, most of the kids that played hockey lived up in the suburbs, and they had, they were more well-to-do. Me and my brothers were the only kids from the neighborhood that really played ice hockey because it was expensive. And I find I'm very proud of the fact that hockey has been so good to me working in the NHL for 27 years because my dad worked really hard to get me through hockey, and he couldn't afford it. And even the high school I went to, they had a hockey team. And you had to pay $1,200 for your kid to play on the team, and you had to pay for ice time, you had to pay for the equipment. And it was my dad who took me in 8th grade or 7th grade to a village championship that high school was playing in, and there was like 3,000 people at the game. And when I went to that game, I was hooked, and I knew I wanted to go to that high school, and it was all part of my dad's plan. So my dad basically put a plan together to get me to play a sport that he couldn't afford at a school that he couldn't afford. And that, I think, is where I also learned my, very hard work ethic because I had my dad setting that example.
Was hockey ever an option for you beyond school, or was that not really a consideration?
It wasn't a consideration. I got a pretty late start as far as being really good. I played on a club team in a college for a little while, but I never played beyond, travel teams and stuff like that. And I'll never tell you, I'm not the guy that's going to tell you, wow, I could have done this. I wasn't good enough. And working around athletes, just like when you watch baseball players, you walk down the first base line when guys are warming up and everybody's throwing 90 miles an hour. So if you can't throw 90 miles an hour, you can't play at that level. So I just had fun with it. I haven't played in a few years, but I did play all the way up until probably about age 45. I would play as much as I could.
All right, then what drew you to the broadcast side of things? What do you remember about your first experience and what kind of pushed you down that path?
The Chicago Blackhawks announcer was a guy named Pat Foley, and I just loved listening to him. And then I wanted to aspire to be like him. So I got into television to try to be a play-by-play guy. And then as time went on, going to school for it, I started to realize that I had something with directing and producing. And so I turned that into my focus. And that's how I got into production.
Okay, so you mentioned Pat Foley, excuse me. Who, I don't know, did you ever get the chance to meet him? And if so, or if not, who were some of your early influences as you were just kind of getting your feet wet and gaining an understanding of what this was all about?
Well, hands down, it was a lady named Lisa Seltzer, who was the producer-director for the Chicago Blackhawks. And I was interning at Sports Channel Chicago. And I ended up becoming the intern for the Blackhawks telecast. And it wasn't work, right? I'm doing stuff for the Blackhawks. It was the most awesome experience of my life. And I worked so hard because I felt like, man, this is my chance. And here I am. This is the Blackhawks. This is Sports Channel. If I can just somehow prove to these people that I'm worthy of a job, this is it. And I couldn't work harder. And I was going to school full time. I was working to try to pay for school, and I was doing my internship. And Lisa really, really looked out for me and took care of me. And she ended up applying for the director of broadcasting job for the soon-to-be new NHL franchise, the Mighty Ducks of Anaheim, in 1993, which just happened to coincide with the time that I was graduating college. And she called me and said, I got a job for you. And I'll never forget it. She's like, are you ready to go through the wall for me? And I was like, you bet I am. and she gave me my first chance, and she taught me so much. She really, really did. And then she worked with Pat Foley for 15 years, so I got to know Pat, and I know him really well now. He, every time he sees me, he makes it a point to talk to me and ask how I'm doing, and he's mentioned me on the air because my wife sings the anthem for the Stars, and when the Blackhawks play, they'll cover the anthem, and then he'll say, "That's Selena Ray, and her husband is Mark Vittorio, former intern of the Blackhawks, who's now the director for the Dallas Stars." And he gives me a big shout out. So everybody back home will text me. I'll be like, "Dude, I saw your wife, and I heard your name." And it's always cool that Pat does that. He's a good guy, and it's really cool to get to know a guy like that. I've golfed with him. I've gone to dinners with him, and I've actually done a couple of Blackhawks games when the Stars didn't make the playoffs. They asked me to do a couple playoff games for them, and so it was a great experience to work with my idol growing up.
That's really cool, and I want to get into that role with Anaheim and being there really from the word go. But before we do that, how would you describe, for people who really don't have much familiarity of what goes on in the roles you mentioned, how would you describe the role of a director and a role of a producer? I know the responsibilities may vary sport to sport as far as the pace and how active you are in each role, but just generally speaking, how would you describe the role of the director and the producer?
The best way to describe it is they both have a responsibility together to put a show on, to make sure that the cameras look right, the cuts are right, the replays are right, the graphics are right. And they both share in that responsibility. If you had to give someone the upper hand as far as who's in charge of it, I would say the producer is in charge of the overall of where the broadcast needs to go. It's the director's job to get the show there. So one of the best descriptions someone gave me is that the producer is like the head coach and the director is like the quarterback. So the producer is going to tell you, hey, we're going to go to this replay and we're going to go to that replay, and it's the director's job. If it's a replay of Mike Modano who had a breakaway, camera 3, give me a shot of 9 white on the whistle. 2, give me the goalie who made the save. And then when the whistle blows, it's ready 2, take 2, ready 3, take 3. Then the producer will tell you what replay machine it is. He's queuing up all the replays. All right, let's go to X first. All right, ready to replay to X, fly to X. All right, Y's next. Ready to dissolve to Y, dissolve to Y. 3, give me Modano again. All right, ready out to 3 and fly to camera 3.
That all makes sense. Well, why have you gravitated more towards directing? I know you've done both, but why did directing appeal more to you?
Well, one thing that I'm not is a type A personality. Hyper-organization is not my forte. It just never has been. I'm one of those creative guys, so I'm a disheveled mess sometimes. And being a good producer means being hyper-organized, because everyone is relying on you to know exactly what's going on. So you got to have your formats done. You got to have your meetings in order. You got to have all your sponsored elements in order. And that's just something that I can do it, and I can do it well. I just don't like doing it, if I'm being totally honest. And the thing about directing that I love is that I show up, I do my prep, I put the headset on, and when that game starts, that's when I'm doing my job. And that's what I do best, and that's what I love the most. So it's not that I didn't like producing. I did like it, but I'm a better director than I am a producer, and it just came more naturally to me being a director.
All right, so if you watch a broadcast, I don't know, maybe you watch a week's worth of broadcast, chances are the analyst or the play-by-play broadcaster is going to reference the truck. And, I think a lot of people hear about the truck, and I've been asked this before. What the heck is the truck? How would you describe what the truck is and what goes on in the truck, and how either calm it can be, but in my experience when I've spent some time in there, maybe how chaotic but organized chaos goes on in the truck?
The truck is a 53-foot trailer. Semi pulls it up, and they usually park it by the dumpster, which is very common in most stadiums. It has an expansion that comes out of the side, so it's called an expando. So that thing comes out to create more room. And in that truck is all the equipment necessary to televise a game. So it has the switcher, which has all the camera buttons and all the replay machine buttons and all of that. It has the audio room, which has a huge audio console for the audio guy. It has a tape room that has, my God, 6 tape machines that record every source for replays. It has the video operator who has to shade all the cameras. And then all the cameras are underneath the bed, and then they go into the arena. Everybody sets all the cameras up, and they all come to the truck. There is seated next to me, to my left is the producer, to my right is the technical director. The technical director is one of the most important people in that truck, I promise you, because he's got to hit all the buttons that I ask him to do. When I say to take camera 2, he takes it. When I replay to whatever, he's got to go to it. We have an audio operator, A1, A2. They're all running all of the mics and everything, so for the sound that you hear. And basically, we have graphics people, tape operators, the guy that does the bug, which tells you the clock and the score, or if you're watching a baseball game, it gives you the count with all the runners on base and what have you. And everybody's doing their job, listening to the producer and the director.
So this is what I wanted to pocket what you had mentioned about the compassion and the loyalty and the just the interaction with people when I asked you about your Italian influence. How much professionally do you think that has helped you? Because your job, as you just kind of mentioned over the last couple minutes, there's a lot of interacting, there's a lot of teamwork that goes on, and I guess in some ways you're kind of bossing people around, for lack of a better phrase, but not in a disrespectful way, but you're relying on other people. And I think just like a sports dynamic, you're more willing to go hard for someone that you have that relationship with and someone you respect. Just like, you talked about with taking that job and running through a brick wall, taking that Anaheim job. You develop these relationships and maybe you find that extra surge to, put in that extra effort. So I'm just curious, how much do you feel like that part of you that we talked about earlier has impacted you or enhanced your ability as a producer and now as a director working with a team?
Well, I think it's everything. I mean, it's just, I spent 8 years with one franchise, and then now I'm almost 19 years with another. And so my loyalty is very evident, and I'm loyal to the people that I work with. That includes all of our camera guys. On our home show, we've got guys that are some of the most talented people in the entire country. And I know that because I've worked around the country, and I know what everybody's capable of. Our camera guys, our audio guys, our technical director. I mean, everybody is so great at what they do, and we've all been doing it together. And so there's just, things like loyalty matter. Our technical director and other people, to give an example, they know how important we feel that they are. So they don't do other things. They don't go other places. They do all of our shows, and it's nice to have that. I just think all those things really matter, and it's done pretty well for me.
All right, so you mentioned Anaheim. It's one thing to go and join. If you were to, and hopefully this isn't the case, and there's not something I don't know that's brewing. But if you were to leave today, leave the Rangers broadcast and join the Kansas City Royals broadcast. That's a franchise that's been around. You'd probably be able to put your fingerprints on that broadcast, but they've been doing stuff, a certain way for however many years. But when you went to Anaheim, you started from scratch. What was that experience like, and how did you go about essentially building a broadcast?
It was, first of all, the greatest experience of my career. And I think that if you ask anybody that was with that team at that time, being involved in the inaugural season of a new franchise is something that you will take with you for the rest of your life. But what was unique about it was still in the early 90s. So it wasn't, and it was hockey. So not so many people were experienced in hockey. So everybody was new. At pretty much our analyst, it was his first analyst job. Our play-by-play guy, it was the first time he'd ever done play-by-play in the NHL. Everybody was new to it. And we spent 3 years until we made the playoffs for the first time together, the coaches, Ron Wilson, it was his first head coaching job. And we all dealt with that together. Even the players, some of the players, it was their first time having a regular shift on an NHL team or being a starting goaltender for Guy Bear. And I've known those people for 27 years, and we all share that same feeling together. So every time we see one another, we go back to what it was like then. And what I've realized is you can never replicate that. If there was a new, like Seattle is a new franchise coming into the NHL in 2 years, and if I was hired to be with Seattle, it could never be like what Anaheim was, because I already have too much experience and I'm a grizzled veteran, and I already know what to expect. And so it was just truly, it was a ride of a lifetime.
What is there one specific challenge that you think back on with that experience and like, man, like I lost sleep over this, I stressed over this, but gosh, we were able to overcome this, and I'm so grateful for that isolated experience in that process?
Let me speak for Lisa, because I didn't have any skin in it. I was a newbie, and I was just like this fresh-faced kid out of college. I was just happy to be there. Lisa had to basically, nowadays they announce a franchise and they have 3 years or 2 years to prepare. We had like 7 months. And I got there in September, and our first game was October 8th, 1993. I got there like September 30th. I mean, I was there for a week leading up to it. Lisa worked so hard to get that thing on the air. She had to get a truck deal. She had to get a TV contract put in place. She had to get camera positions figured out. The new arena didn't have camera positions on the center platform, so they had to take a suite and they had to turn it into a camera platform. So she had to go through all of that stuff. And it actually took its toll on her, because about a month into the season, she had like a physical breakdown, and we had to take her to the hospital. So it was quite a daunting task. But like I said, for me, I mean, I was a month earlier, I was an intern, and I was working at Motorola in the shipping department. So I was just happy to be around. I'd do whatever they needed.
All right. So one of the things that when I asked people in preparation for this conversation about you, the one common theme, and there were a few that we're going to get to, but one was your ability to handle big moments. And I know that some people say that, oh, the moments make the make it easy, because a big moment provides that energy, the emotion. But I also know from my knowledge of the TV side, well, that's I guess there's maybe some truth to that, but there are ways to capture that moment better than others, and heck, I mean, there's certainly ways to mess it up, and there are ways to amplify it. But one of the consistent themes from people who have worked with you, they've raved about your ability to handle big moments. What are important elements to you when you are directing a game and there is a big moment, whether you're expecting it, it's a pregame ceremony or something that's going to happen, or maybe something that you're not sure is going to happen but ends up happening as the game unfolds?
I'll start with the crew, because I have two moments I can think of that were big. I have Beltre's 3,000th hit and Mike Modano's final game as a Dallas Star. Those are two of the bigger moments I've ever been around. When you work a long time with your crew, they all know kind of my style. They know that I like a creative type of shooting. I like to be, wider so you can push to something else, or have two things in your frame and then go to something. So they kind of know exactly what I'm looking for, so that when we hit a big moment, it's kind of great for me, because every monitor I look at with every camera has got something awesome, and it's like low-hanging fruit. And that's a testament to our crew. And that really, if I was going to say what I can bring to that, is I do think that I have an ability to see a lot of things in the same frame, kind of. So if I'm looking at 8 monitors, I can kind of see them all. And I don't know, it's always happened to be something I could do. So if there's a perfect shot, I can find it. And I think too that, our crew is so calm and collected. And so it slows those moments down. So, the cool thing about it is, at the end of the day, those are just all team efforts that everybody just is like raising their level. And you talk about like the loyalty factor and all of the commitment. we got guys that love the teams so much. When we did that Madonna moment, we all knew it was the final game he'd ever play in Dallas as a Dallas Star. And so everybody was invested in it. And when that game ended, a couple of the guys were teary-eyed. I mean, they had been around him for, 20 years. And, Mike was a great guy, and he talked to all of us, and he would shoot pucks at some of the camera guys and all of that. So it's stuff like that, man, that makes it really special.
So you mentioned two of the moments I wanted to ask you about. There are others, and I guess they all have varying levels of emotion. But on the negative side, I imagine you were in the truck for the Rich Peverly game. Maybe
Yes.
a bittersweet one is when Trevor Strader sang the national anthem. The bitter part, obviously, with what went down with his father and his illness, the late Dave Strader. But the sweet part, just how special that moment must have been. And then I know you didn't direct the last game at Globe Life Park, but I also know that you did a lot of work to help Dave Burchett and the rest of the crew prepare for that. So those are some really emotional moments. Well, is there anything different? Like the Adrian Beltre 3000th hit, there's emotion there, but I guess it's a different type of emotion than some of the ones we talked about, including that Madonna game. Is there a different approach when you know that there's going to be something that's tugging at the emotional sensibilities of people, or a different way you go about it?
Yeah, well, like Dave Strader with Trevor singing, we could prepare for that. There's actually a funny story about that with Mike Leary, our producer. I still make fun of him to this day for what he did. So the producer has this thing called an ISO monitor, and what the ISO monitor is it's a monitor for an announcer that the producer can punch in anything he wants to show the announcer, and it's right by the announcer's position. Okay, so I told Mike what I wanted to do is I wanted to have a camera by Dave Strader's position, and I wanted to, at some point during the anthem, I wanted to go to that position so you could see Strader's chair, and then his son would be in the monitor, the ISO monitor, and it would look great, and it would be like this really kind of dramatic shot. That was the whole point. Well, Leary is always out of habit. He puts program in that monitor all the time for his announcer, so he's always hitting the program button. Well, he just didn't think that I needed it. He forgot, so he hit program. So now the moment happens, and I go to this, what is the best shot of what I at least want it to look like. And when I go to it, the monitor that's supposed to have Trevor in it has program. And if you ever see what program does, it keeps feeding itself. So then it's program and program and program. And I'm like, Mike, change it. And then he hit the right button, thank God. And it worked. So we had about 2 seconds of a mishap, but it was just like the perfect shot. And then he felt so bad. So I just always rub his nose in it.
Two things. One, he told me that you were, without question, going to bring that up. So we checked that one up. Yep. And two, he blames Eddie Olczyk for that because of what Eddie likes to do when he works those games with Eddie. So that was his excuse, and I'm sure he shared that excuse with you. But, he brought that story up to me to kind of, build off this big moment discussion, because he said what makes you unique is that you don't just take the big moment and let it kind of handle itself, but you like to create, and you probably will know what I mean when I say this. I'm certainly hoping you do, but in his words, that you will create moments within moments. And I guess that example that you just shared with how you wanted to structure everything is that. But what does that mean to you, and why is it? Why going about it that way is important to you, and how did you kind of get down that path where you're like, okay, these are the things I want to do. I want to create moments within moments.
Well, I just think it's my job is to make it look the best that it can. And so if you can understand kind of how it's going to play out and just kind of add some creativity to it, you're doing your job. If you just sit back and react to it, then you're not really. I knew what the anthem was going to be and what it meant to everybody, right? I knew that there was going to be people wearing pink or purple. I don't know what that color is. It looks like pink purple, but they were going to wear the pink jerseys, and there were going to be jerseys with Dave's last name and stuff like that. So it's like if you you just got to tell people to find it so that you have it. But you got to know it going, you just assume that it's going to happen going in, and it's your job to kind of make it look the best you can. So I guess that's it.
Okay, so, another thing that multiple people shared with me is your level of preparation, and that there are, directors often know what's going on with the team they're covering, and, it's not that they don't know who the key players are, but that you take it to another level with your awareness of, the non-statistical stories, the statistical stories, and that, you consume so much information. So what level of preparation do you put in? Let's take baseball, because I always think preparing for baseball is so tough because it's every single day. But what level of preparation do you put in, and what are the things that are important for you to consume in advance of a game or a series?
Well, I think you just start with every season, right? You live the season with the team. And so every season has the stories, and you gotta follow them, and you gotta remember them, and you gotta take note of them. And what I mean by that is there may be an instance where, maybe a starting pitcher throws at a guy to defend his teammate, and then, let's say that was Mike Minor. Well, 2 months down the road, that may happen again with the same team. Well, it's my job to remember, Minor did the same thing. 6, give me a shot of Mike Minor. Ready, 6, take 6. Because that'll probably remind CJ if he didn't pick up on it, and then he'll be like, well, this happened a few months ago with Mike Minor. And so it's just stuff like that, right? And that's the whole point about being a fan of this. If you love the game, you live the season with the team, and that's, you're doing your job, but really you're just following it. And I don't know, I just, for some reason, I pick up on that stuff. I remember it. The other thing that's important is to watch highlights, to see the other team and who's doing well and who's playing well, who's the surprise shortstop or whatever that is. You just need to know the league. You need to know the players because, at any time Tom Grieve may mention, Derek Jeter if we're playing the Yankees. I mean, that's an easy one. He's playing shortstop. But what if he mentions another player and he's got a great story on him? I got to get there immediately, so I need to know who that is.
I guess those conversations. So from a sports talk standpoint, I always ask people, do you like to know going into a segment what your partner's angles are, or what he's going to say or she's going to say, or would you rather just know, hey, we're going to talk about Adrian Beltre's 3,000th hit, but that you know nothing more beyond that because you want it to be organic. I guess in your role, it's important for you to live inside the mind of the guys and gals on air. And how important is that chemistry to build? And I guess I ask that specifically because with Dave Raymond and CJ Niskowski, they've only been a part of the broadcast now for a few years. It's not like we're dealing with guys like Tom Grieve who've been a part of the broadcast for, forever seemingly. So when you've got new talent, how important is that, and how do you go about developing that chemistry, or is that just something that naturally happens over time?
Beers. No, it's funny though, but if you hang out with the people that you work with, especially the announcers, a lot of times when you start talking about work, they're going to start telling you things. They're going to start regurgitating what they're preparing for. They don't even realize it. I see that more so with Razor. So like working with Razor, we've worked together so long now, I know everything he's going to talk about. But it's nice to sit and have a couple beers with him and just kind of talk hockey because, he may start talking about St. Louis, who we're about to play. And I'll be like, did you know that this happened and this happened and this happened? And then we're just talking in conversation. But if I hear him start mentioning that in the game, I know exactly where I need to go. And so it's just stuff like that. On football, what I would do is I would sit with the analysts and I would be like, hey, bud, what are some of your key storylines? Because I want to know. Because if he's going to talk about the fact that the offensive coordinator of one team, went to high school with the defensive coordinator of another team, I got to get that ready. So my camera guys need to know who they are, what they look like. If I just try to go off of that when he mentions it, we'll never get there, and then I'm not doing my job.
All right, outside the box thinking, Vito. I think it's critical in a lot of roles, especially creative roles, and this is another thing that your peers with whom I spoke, I already gave away one of them earlier, shared about you is your ability to not just come up with random outside the box ideas that make no sense, but outside the box ideas that just fit in so well and then ultimately become staples or fixtures of your broadcast. Is that something, for lack of a better phrase, is outside the box thinking just a God-given gift, or can you train yourself to be better at that, or is it just something that some people are just naturally more creative than others? Is it more that, or is it something that you've worked at?
I think I've worked at it a little bit. When I was with Anaheim, our CEO was Michael Eisner, and this was a man who was just bought a hockey team, and he was asking about, hey, I can't recognize the players. They need to take their helmets off. And it's like, well, they can't. It's a rule. Well, why don't they take them off when they're on the bench? And it's like, well, because they're going to go back on the ice in 30 seconds and they don't have time to put it on. Well, what if they had a button that they could hit and the helmet would go back? And he would just rattle off idea after idea after idea. Because what I was able to learn from a guy like that, he didn't care how dumb it might sound, because the dumbest idea could be the best idea that we ever had if you just try it. And Jason Walsh, a great example, when he was our producer, he's now our executive producer. He had an idea that he had a 4-box. He wanted to put 4 cameras up at the same time. We're going to take it live. We'll take it live. It'll be great. And we tried it. It was bad. Okay, he admits it. But you know what? How would we know if we don't try? And I think I've been working with a lot of good people that think like that, so you end up having to think like that. Like Darryl Ray one time came in, and he said, here's what I want to do. The next time we have a 5-on-3, before the face-off, I want you to take a shot of Marty Turco and then just stay on him and just show the fans what he's doing in a power play. If they score, we'll show replays. Just try it. So we did. And we got unbelievable reviews from that. Like the head of the NHL broadcast department called us and was like, that was awesome. That was a great idea. You just got to try it. That wasn't my idea, by the way. That was Razor's.
All right. Last thing, Vito. I know you mentioned growing up that you loved baseball and you loved hockey, but I guess, more recently you have done more and more baseball from a directorial standpoint. What is it about directing a baseball game that you most enjoy? And I guess one of the things that one of your peers mentioned is that it seems like they've witnessed you falling in love with baseball before their eyes. So I guess when you hear that, what does that mean? And is that true? Have you grown an even stronger affinity for baseball from a professional standpoint, or how would you describe your relationship with baseball?
Well, my relationship with baseball is that when I got into it, it was so late in my career. I have to go back. In high school, I played both baseball and hockey, and I quit baseball because I liked hockey better. But I was better at baseball. And so I just turned my back on baseball, and I got into hockey, and then I went to the NHL, and I worked for years and years and years, and then I finally got into baseball. And so when I got into baseball, what I realized was, wow, I love this game more than I ever dreamed. And the thing about, when you're not working baseball, everybody that works at, oh my God, it's such a grind. It's so many games. It's every day. But I looked at it differently. I loved being in the everyday, because you don't realize how strategy comes into play and how a manager has to manage, right? This bullpen, I probably should go to this guy, but he's tired and I can't bring him in. And there's all of these things that go into the everyday of baseball. That's pretty cool. And so when you live it like that every day, it's really awesome. And as far as directing it, it's the hardest game to direct, hands down. And somebody said this to me, and I always explain it like this. It's the only professional sport where the object that they use is away from where they score. So basketball, they put a ball in a hoop. Football, they throw the ball in the end zone. Hockey, they shoot a puck in the net. Baseball, it's in the right center gap and 2 guys are scoring, and it's my job to show you all that. And, oh, by the way, don't do what I did when I was thinking I was getting the hang of it, and have a guy cut a ball off, turn, throw behind the runner, and pick him off for the third out of the inning, and nobody knows what happens because the producer was like, "What the hell just happened?" And I said, "I don't know what just happened."
Well, there you go. That's my conversation with Mark Vittorio. I hope you really enjoyed it. As I mentioned at the beginning, when you say the name Mark Vittorio and you're not in the broadcasting industry, you might scratch your head and wonder, who's that guy? But if you're in the broadcasting industry and you say that name, there is a lot of credibility that comes with mentioning the name Mark Vittorio, with everything he's accomplished and his innovative mind, and hopefully you got a sense of that with that conversation. Well, that's going to do it, obviously, for this episode of the Just a Sec Conversation. Excited to release another episode here in a few days, and another one shortly thereafter that. We've got a former NFL player and a sports broadcaster paving her own path. That's still to come this week for the Just a Sec Conversation. As always, please subscribe, like, comment, share. I'd love for you to do any and all of those four things when it comes to this conversation or anything else a part of this channel. Thanks so much again. Stay safe, be healthy. We'll talk to you later.